Welcome to another episode of Park Avenue Plastic Surgery Class, the podcast where we explore controversies and breaking issues in plastic surgery. I'm your co-host, Doreen Wu. I'm excited to be here with Dr. Lawrence Bass, Park Avenue plastic surgeon, educator, and technology innovator. The title of today's episode is Some Relaxing News, exploring how the neuromodulator landscape is evolving, from Botox to Revance. This episode is focused on neuromodulators. I hear that term often used interchangeably with neurotoxins. Are they the same thing? Do they both refer to Botox, Dr. Bass?
Yes, there are all kinds of different names for these medicines. Neuromodulators is the most popular. I also like the phrase relaxer because it explains what it does. But these are all medicines that are botulinum toxin A. There are 4 products on the market in the United States, all of which are type A. There used to be a type B product. There are several serotypes for this particular toxin, but only type A is on the market currently, as Botox, which was the original product, and then several others, which we'll discuss going forward.
It's interesting to know that there are several neuromodulator brands available on the market. Can you give us a history lesson of how neuromodulators came to be used for cosmetic purposes?
So the medication is distinctly different from the illness. Botulism is an illness that's caused by bacteria in food. The bacteria multiply in your body and in the food and produce the toxin which poisons you. Many medicines are, in fact, metabolic blockers. They block or poison a specific metabolic pathway. But if it does it very specifically and is dosed correctly, that can be therapeutic instead of dangerous. And that's exactly what happens with Botox and the other medicines like it. The particular chemical substance that does this, that the bacteria produce, was eventually identified and isolated in the 1940s. Very controlled amounts of this were then studied for treatment of various muscle spasm disorders. And while they were doing this, they noticed that wrinkling in the area would be reduced as well. In 1989, the FDA approved Botox for blepharospasm and strabismus, problems with involuntary blinking of the eyelids and trouble with some of the muscles that control the position of the eye. In 2000, muscle spasm problems in the neck were approved. And then in 2002, it was approved for wrinkles in between the eyebrows, what's become termed the 11s. And other approvals followed that in reconstructive areas as well as cosmetic approvals. So 2004, excessive sweating or hyperhidrosis. 2010, migraines. In 2013, an approval for lateral canthal wrinkles or the crow's feet wrinkles at the side of the eye. And also, we've had multiple approvals of new products. So in 2009, Dysport became the second neuromodulator approved in the United States. Xeomin in 2011 became the third, and Jeuveau the fourth of these type A botulinum toxin medications.
How do these neuromodulators work? You mentioned that they're made from the botulinum toxin type A, but how exactly do they relax our muscles and treat the wrinkles?
So the medication acts actually at the nerve ending where normally little vesicles of acetylcholine are released, open up, and dump acetylcholine into the synapse or the space between the nerve and the muscle, and that stimulates the muscle to fire. These medications bind to a specific receptor called SNAP25 that prevents the vesicles from opening up and releasing the neurotransmitter acetylcholine. That leaves the muscle unable to contract and it relaxes, so that, depending on the dosing, takes some or all of the activity out of the muscle.
The science behind how these medicines work makes a lot of sense. Can you talk me through what a treatment is like?
A typical cosmetic treatment on the face involves looking at the features, assessing, is there mostly a dynamic component? Is there a fixed wrinkle or fold component? And that's going to be treated in a different way, not with a neuromodulator, but the dynamic component is going to be treated with the neuromodulator, seeing exactly where the muscle is active, because the treatment targets the muscle, not the wrinkle. In other words, where the medicine needs to be placed. Most of us will apply numbing gel or cool, or sometimes a vibrating element, all of which blunt the sensation of injecting the medicine under the skin. And the medicine will be dotted in several areas over the course of the muscle that's being targeted. This treatment's done in just a few minutes, and at the end of the treatment, you can resume most of your normal activities, although everyone has different rules. I ask patients not to have bending, lifting, or sports for a few hours. Over a few days, the muscle starts relaxing, and after a week or two, the medicine is at peak effect, and this persists for several months. The package insert, or what's called the information for use, says the effect is 3 to 4 months, although many patients may go as long as 6 months before they need retreatment.
So far, we've mostly focused on the muscle relaxing effect of neuromodulators, but I've heard of Botox being used for other purposes. Can you talk about some of these?
So this blocking of acetylcholine release has effect on a number of other factors, such as sweat production, and again, a specific FDA indication for hyperhidrosis, sebum production, which is oil produced on the skin and may be related to how oily the skin looks or how much acne is taking place in the skin. Other characteristics of skin character or scars may be treated, and some people believe can be treated with micro amounts of neuromodulators. And these are all off-label kinds of applications currently, except the hyperhidrosis. And there's some discussion about mood elevation with Botox and other neuromodulators, and whether that's because we're happier because we look better, whether not frowning makes us feel better, or if there's some direct biological effect, nobody knows, but this is something that's being investigated.
Let's shift gears and talk about how the neuromodulator landscape is evolving. What are some of the new developments?
There are always new approvals and new indications coming for cosmetic applications. The original approval, as we said, was the 11 lines, the vertical lines in between the eyebrows, but there are approvals being sought for all 3 areas together with each of the individual neuromodulator products. There are approvals for new medical conditions being sought, and a number of treatments for off-label indications. We treat the vertical lines, but bunny lines in the nose are commonly treated, lines going side to side across the forehead, the crow's feet, as we mentioned. And in addition, there are a number of areas low down in the face that are treated. Things like cobblestoning in the chin, lipstick bleed lines, sometimes marionette lines have a significant dynamic component or more of a dynamic component on one side of the face, and neuromodulators can be used to help that. Vertical banding in the neck is commonly treated, and some people like to do something called the Nefertiti lift, which involves injecting under the jawline to help relax that portion of the platysma muscle and float up some of the skin in a face that's beginning to sag.
That leads me to my final question. Dr. Bass, what is the role of neuromodulators overall, and what are some takeaways for our listeners from this episode?
So each modality has its own application. So neuromodulators are not for laxity prevention or treatment. They're not for volume loss prevention, which is fillers, but they're excellent at treating dynamic irides or wrinkles, and as an adjunctive treatment for the dynamic component of some folds, for example, the marionette lines or cobblestoning in the chin. There are new products coming that are under investigation. At least 2 companies have spent time investigating topically applied products that can be transmitted through the skin using proprietary vehicles. These are not FDA approved and no way of knowing if they ever will be, but there's certainly significant clinical data suggesting that there's progress in these areas. So we may see products that are really different from what has happened previously with the existing 4. This is a primary treatment for dynamic irides. That's the number 1 cosmetic treatment in the US, surgical or non-surgical. There were 2.65 million injections in 2020, which again is the last year that statistics were available from the Aesthetic Society. Fillers are number 2 with 1.3 million treatments. And just to give you an example, the number 1 surgical treatment is liposuction with 296,000 in 2020. Why is it the most popular treatment? Because it's quick, it's easy to do, there's no downtime, and there's something about the effect that patients seem to find exceptionally pleasing, just a rested, smoother look that's natural, that resonates with patients as looking like themselves but looking good.
Thank you for joining us today and sharing the quote-unquote relaxing news about neuromodulators. It has been fascinating to learn more about the myriad of ways in which neuromodulators can be used for aesthetic purposes. If you think of other exciting developments in plastic surgery that you would like us to discuss in an upcoming episode, please reach out. This is Doreen Wu, thanking you for joining Dr. Bass and me for this discussion of neuromodulators, Botox, and the like. Be sure to join us next time, and don't forget to subscribe to our podcast so that you don't miss out on all of the exciting content that is coming soon.
Thank you for joining us in this episode of the Park Avenue Plastic Surgery Class podcast with Dr. Lawrence Bass, Park Avenue plastic surgeon, educator, and technology innovator. The commentary in this podcast represents opinion. This podcast does not present medical advice, but rather general information about plastic surgery that does not necessarily relate to the specific conditions of any individual patient. No doctor-patient relationship is established by listening to or participating in this podcast. Consult your physician to advise you about your individual healthcare. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with your friends, and be sure to subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to podcasts.